The morning light filtered through my bedroom curtains as I sat cross-legged on my unmade bed, laptop balanced on my knees, scrolling through dating profiles with the kind of desperate hope that comes after 18 months of solitude. My coffee had gone cold an hour ago, but I couldn't bring myself to get up. The silence of my apartment felt heavier than usual that Tuesday morning in March. Outside my window, the city hummed with the energy of people rushing to work, to meetings, to lives that felt more purposeful than mine. My name is Sarah, and at 34, I thought I had life figured out. I owned a small graphic design business that I ran from my home office, had a modest savings account, and lived in a decent one-bedroom apartment in Portland. But success in business hadn't translated to success in love. My last relationship had ended 2 years earlier when Marcus decided he needed space to find himself. Apparently, himself was waiting in the arms of his 23-year-old yoga instructor. The breakup had shattered something inside me. Not just my heart, but my confidence. I'd thrown myself into work, designing logos and websites for small businesses, telling myself that independence was enough. But late at night, when the design projects were finished and the apartment felt too quiet, I'd find myself staring at my phone, wondering if I'd ever feel that spark of connection again. I'd been on every dating app known to humanity: Tinder, Bumble, Hinge, Match, each one promising to deliver my soulmate with a simple swipe. Most conversations fizzled out after a few messages. The men seemed either too eager, sending inappropriate photos within hours, or completely disinterested, responding with single-word answers that killed any possibility of connection. That's when I discovered Love Connect, a newer dating platform that promised meaningful connections for serious relationships. The interface was sleek, requiring detailed profiles and promising to match people based on compatibility rather than just physical attraction. It felt more sophisticated than the other apps, more intentional. I spent hours crafting my profile, selecting photos that showed my genuine smile, my love for hiking, my artistic side surrounded by my design work. I'd almost given up when his message arrived. "Hi, Sarah. I couldn't help but notice your profile. Your passion for design really shines through, and I have to say, your smile is absolutely radiant. I'm David, and I'd love to get to know you better. I hope you're having a wonderful day." The message felt different immediately. It wasn't generic or overly familiar. It wasn't asking for my number or suggesting we meet that night. It was respectful, thoughtful, and it made my heart skip in a way I hadn't felt in years. I clicked on his profile, and my breath caught. David Mitchell, 36, was gorgeous in an understated way. His profile photos showed a man with kind eyes and a gentle smile, dressed professionally, but not pretentiously. He listed his occupation as a civil engineer working on international infrastructure projects. His profile described him as someone who valued honesty, family, and meaningful conversations over superficial connections. But it was his additional photos that really drew me in. Pictures of him at construction sites wearing a hard hat, standing next to massive machinery. Photos of him in different countries: Nigeria, Ghana, South Africa, always with that same warm smile. His bio mentioned his commitment to improving infrastructure in developing nations, his love for travel, and his desire to find someone to share life's adventures with. I stared at his message for 20 minutes before responding. My fingers hovered over the keyboard as I crafted and deleted response after response. I wanted to sound interested, but not desperate, intelligent, but not pretentious. "Hi, David. Thank you for such a thoughtful message. Your work sounds fascinating. I've always admired people who dedicate their lives to making a real difference in the world. I'd love to hear more about your projects. Hope you're having a great day too." His response came within an hour. "Sarah, I'm so glad you wrote back. Your curiosity about my work is refreshing. Most people's eyes glaze over when I start talking about water treatment facilities and road construction. Right now, I'm working on a major project in Lagos, Nigeria, helping to build critical infrastructure for underserved communities. It's challenging work, but incredibly rewarding. I'd love to hear about your design work too. Creativity has always fascinated me. The conversation flowed with an ease I hadn't experienced in years. David asked thoughtful questions about my business, remembered details from my profile, and shared stories about his travels that painted vivid pictures of the places he'd been. He told me about watching the sunrise over the Sahara, about the gratitude in the eyes of villagers when clean water finally flowed through new pipes, about the children who would wave at him from the sides of dusty roads. Over the next few weeks, our conversations deepened. David would message me every morning, asking about my day, sharing details about his work, and slowly revealing pieces of himself. He told me about growing up in Ohio, about his father, who had been a construction worker and inspired his career choice, about his mother, who had passed away from cancer 5 years earlier. "She always told me that the right woman would come along when I least expected it," he wrote one evening. "I'm starting to think she might have been right." The message made my chest flutter with a warmth I hadn't felt in years. I found myself looking forward to his messages more than anything else in my day. I'd wake up and immediately reach for my phone, hoping to see his name in my notifications. When he didn't message for a few hours, I'd feel an anxiety that surprised me with its intensity. 3 weeks into our conversations, David called me for the first time. His voice was deep and warm, with a slight accent that I couldn't quite place but found incredibly attractive. We talked for 2 hours that first night, and I found myself curled up on my couch, feeling like a teenager with her first crush. "I have to be honest, Sarah," he said as our conversation was winding down. "I haven't felt this connected to someone in a very long time. There's something special about you." "I feel the same way," I whispered, and I meant it. For the first time in years, I felt like someone truly saw me, understood me, wanted to know everything about me. Our phone calls became a nightly routine. David would call me from his hotel room in Lagos, and we'd talk for hours about everything and nothing. He had a way of making me feel like the most interesting person in the world. He remembered every detail I shared, the name of my childhood dog, my favorite coffee shop, the story about how I'd gotten into graphic design after a college professor had believed in my talent when I didn't believe in myself. "I wish I could be there with you right now," he'd say, and I'd close my eyes and imagine what it would feel like to have him sitting beside me on my couch, his hand in mine. A month into our relationship, David started sending me photos that made everything feel more real. Pictures of himself at his work site, wearing the same hard hat from his dating profile. Photos of his hotel room, modest but clean. A selfie of him holding a cup of coffee with a note, "Thinking of you with my morning coffee." Each photo felt like a gift, a piece of proof that this amazing man was real and that he was choosing to share his life with me. He also started talking about the future in a way that made my heart race with possibility. "When I finish this project in 6 months, I want to come to Portland," he told me one night. "I want to take you to dinner at that little Italian place you love, and I want to walk through those rose gardens you're always talking about. I want to see your art studio and meet the woman who's been stealing my heart through a phone screen." I'd never wanted anything more in my entire life. But then, the requests started. It began small, almost apologetically. David called me one evening, his voice strained with worry. "Sarah, I hate to even bring this up, but I'm in a bit of a bind. The company I work for is having some cash flow issues, and they're delaying our pay by a few weeks. I have enough to cover my basic expenses, but I need to send money to my daughter's school for her tuition payment. It's due tomorrow, and if I don't pay it, she'll be kicked out of her program." My heart ached for him. He'd told me about Emma, his 15-year-old daughter who lived with her mother in California. He'd shown me photos of a beautiful teenager with his same kind eyes, and he'd talked about her with such pride and love. "How much do you need?" I asked without hesitation. It's embarrassing to even ask, but it's $3,000. I know it's a lot, and I completely understand if you can't help. I'll pay you back as soon as my paycheck comes through, I promise. $3,000 was a significant amount for me, but it wasn't impossible. I had savings, and more importantly, I had feelings for David that ran deeper than money. This was the man I was falling in love with, and his daughter needed help. "Of course I'll help," I said. "How do I send it?" "You're incredible, Sarah. I don't know how I got so lucky to find you." The relief in his voice was palpable. "The easiest way would be through Western Union. I can walk you through it." The process felt strange. David insisted I send the money to a business associate in Lagos, who would then transfer it to David's account and wire it to the school. When I questioned why it was so complicated, he explained that international banking was difficult from Nigeria, and this was the most reliable way to ensure the money reached the right place quickly. Standing in the Western Union office, filling out the forms with shaking hands, I felt a knot of anxiety in my stomach. But David's voice was in my head, telling me how much he loved me, how grateful he was, how he couldn't wait to repay me and hold me in his arms. "I love you, Sarah," he'd whispered the night before. "I know it might seem too soon to say that, but I can't hold it back anymore. You've changed my life." I'd said it back, meaning every word. The money was sent, and David's gratitude was overwhelming. He called me that night, his voice thick with emotion. "I don't know how to thank you. Emma's secure in her program, and it's all because of your incredible generosity. I love you so much, Sarah. I can't wait to spend the rest of my life showing you how much you mean to me." 2 weeks later, there was another emergency. David called me, his voice shaking with panic. "Sarah, something terrible has happened. I was mugged leaving the work site yesterday. They took my wallet, my phone, everything. I managed to borrow a phone to call you, but I'm stranded. I need to get to the hospital. I think I might have a concussion, but I don't have any money for the taxi or the medical bills." My heart pounded as I listened to him describe the attack. I could hear the pain in his voice, the fear and confusion. The thought of him hurt and alone in a foreign country made me feel sick. "How much do you need?" I asked, already mentally calculating what I could afford. "The hospital bill will probably be around $2,000, and I need maybe $300 more for transportation and to replace some essentials. I'm so sorry to ask again, Sarah. I know I still owe you from last time, but I'm desperate." This time, I didn't hesitate. I sent the money that same day, using the same complicated process David had outlined before. When I tried to suggest he go to a local hospital that might have payment plans, he explained that the healthcare system in Nigeria was different, that foreigners needed to pay up front. The pattern continued over the next 3 months. Each emergency was plausible, urgent, and heartbreaking. David's project was delayed, and he needed money for extended accommodation costs. His daughter Emma got sick, and he needed to help with medical expenses. His work visa was about to expire, and he needed funds for legal fees to extend it. Each time, I felt that familiar twist of anxiety in my stomach. Each time, I told myself that this was what love meant, being there for someone when they needed you most. Each time, David's gratitude and love felt so genuine that my doubts dissolved. "You're my angel, Sarah," he'd whisper during our nightly calls. "I don't know what I did to deserve you, but I thank God every day for bringing you into my life." The amounts grew larger. $5,000, $7,000, $10,000. I was dipping into my savings, my emergency fund, even my business account. I stopped eating out, canceled subscriptions, and delayed payments on my own bills. But David's need always seemed more urgent than my own discomfort. I rationalized every red flag that flickered in my mind. When I asked why he couldn't use his credit cards, he explained that international banking restrictions made it impossible. When I suggested he contact his family for help, he reminded me that his parents had passed away, and he was estranged from his siblings. When I asked about his company's insurance or employee assistance programs, he described the complicated bureaucracy of international contracting that made such help unavailable. "I hate asking you for money," he'd say, his voice heavy with shame. "It makes me feel like less of a man. But you're the only person in my life I can trust, the only person who truly understands me." The isolation was subtle but effective. David would express concern when I mentioned talking to friends or family about our relationship. "I know people might not understand what we have," he'd say. "Long-distance relationships are hard for people to grasp, especially when they haven't experienced this kind of connection. I just want to protect what we have from people who might try to interfere." Slowly, I found myself sharing less about David with the people in my life. When my sister asked about my dating life, I'd give vague answers. When my friends invited me out, I'd often decline, preferring to stay home and wait for David's call. My world was shrinking, but it felt like it was filling up with love. 6 months into our relationship, I had sent David $52,000. The number should have shocked me, but it had happened so gradually that each individual amount seemed reasonable in the context of our relationship. I told myself it was an investment in our future together. David had promised to pay me back as soon as his project was completed, and beyond that, we were talking about marriage. What was mine would soon be ours anyway. But then, everything changed. I woke up one morning in September to find that David's profile on Love Connect had vanished. Our message history was gone. When I tried to call his number, it went straight to a generic voicemail that didn't even mention his name. Panic set in immediately. My hands shook as I tried calling again and again. I sent messages to the number we'd been texting, but they bounced back as undeliverable. I searched for him on social media, but David Mitchell seemed to have disappeared entirely from the internet. For 3 days, I held on to hope. Maybe there was a technical issue. Maybe his phone had been stolen again. Maybe the work site had no internet connection. I made excuses for his silence because the alternative was too devastating to consider. On the 4th day, unable to concentrate on work or sleep or eat, I decided to do something I'd never thought to do before. I took one of David's photos, the one of him at the construction site that had seemed so genuine, and ran it through a reverse image search. The results appeared on my screen, and my world collapsed. The same photo appeared on dozens of websites. It was a stock photo of a construction worker, available for purchase from multiple photography sites. The man I'd been talking to for 6 months, the man I'd fallen in love with, the man I'd sent $52,000 to, wasn't David Mitchell at all. I stared at the screen, my vision blurring as tears streamed down my face. My chest felt like it was caving in. The room spun around me, and I had to grip the edge of my desk to keep from falling. Every photo he'd sent me was stolen. Every story he'd told me was a lie. Every "I love you" was a manipulation designed to extract money from me. I'd been talking to a stranger for 6 months. I'd fallen in love with a ghost. The physical symptoms hit me first. I ran to the bathroom and threw up until there was nothing left in my stomach. My hands wouldn't stop shaking. I felt dizzy and confused, like I was living in a nightmare that I couldn't wake up from. Then came the shame. How could I have been so stupid? How could I have sent money to someone I'd never met in person? How could I have missed all the red flags that now seemed so obvious? For the first week after the discovery, I barely left my apartment. I couldn't eat, couldn't sleep, couldn't focus on work. I'd spent my entire savings account, plus money from my business, on a person who didn't exist. I'd been so isolated from my friends and family that I didn't even know how to begin explaining what had happened. The practical implications hit me gradually. I couldn't pay my rent for the next month. I had no emergency fund left. My business was struggling because I hadn't been able to focus on client work for weeks. I was financially devastated, but more than that, I was emotionally destroyed. I felt like a fool. I felt like a victim. I felt like I'd never be able to trust my own judgment again. But slowly, very slowly, I started to piece my life back together. The first step was the hardest, telling someone what had happened. I called my sister, Jennifer, on a Tuesday evening, and through tears and shame, I told her everything. I expected judgment, anger, or at best, pity. Instead, she listened with compassion and immediately offered to help. "Sarah, this isn't your fault," she said firmly. "You're not stupid. You're not gullible. You're a loving person who got targeted by a professional criminal. There's a difference." With Jennifer's support, I started researching romance scams. I learned that I wasn't alone. Thousands of people lose money to these schemes every year. I discovered that the scammers are often part of sophisticated criminal organizations that use psychological manipulation techniques to exploit people's desire for connection and love. I reported the crime to the FBI's Internet Crime Complaint Center, though I knew the chances of recovering my money were slim. The scammers had used untraceable money transfer methods and were likely operating from countries with limited law enforcement cooperation. More importantly, I started seeing a therapist who specialized in helping victims of financial fraud. Dr. Martinez helped me understand that my vulnerability to the scam wasn't a character flaw. It was a natural human response to someone who had expertly manipulated my emotions and desires. "Romance scammers don't target stupid people," she explained during one of our sessions. "They target intelligent, successful people who have the emotional capacity to love and the financial means to help. Your kindness and generosity aren't weaknesses. They're strengths that someone exploited." The healing process was slow and painful. I had to rebuild my financial stability, taking on extra client work and borrowing money from family to cover my basic expenses. I had to learn to trust people again, starting with the friends and family members who supported me through the recovery process. But gradually, I also found my voice. 6 months after discovering the scam, I started a blog called Love and Lies, a romance scam survivor's story. I wrote about my experience in detail, sharing the specific tactics the scammer had used and the red flags I'd missed. The response was overwhelming. Dozens of people reached out to share their own stories or to thank me for helping them recognize similar patterns in their own online relationships. I began speaking at community events, sharing my story with groups of singles, seniors, and anyone who might be vulnerable to online romance scams. Each time I told my story, it became less painful and more empowering. I was transforming my experience from a source of shame into a tool for protecting others. The financial recovery took longer. It was 2 years before I had rebuilt my savings, and another year before I felt financially secure again. But the emotional recovery was ongoing, learning to trust my judgment again, learning to be open to love without being naive, learning to forgive myself for the choices I'd made. Today, 3 years after the scam, I'm in a healthy relationship with a man I met through mutual friends. We took things slowly, met in person early, and built our relationship on a foundation of real-world experiences and genuine connection. I still feel a flutter of anxiety when he travels for work, and our communication is limited, but I've learned to distinguish between reasonable caution and paralyzing fear. I've also become an advocate for romance scam awareness. I work with local law enforcement to educate people about the warning signs, and I've helped several friends and acquaintances recognize and avoid potential scams. The most important lessons I've learned are these. Never send money to someone you've only met online. This is the most fundamental rule. No matter how compelling their story, how urgent their need, or how much you care about them, someone who truly loves you will never ask you to send them money, especially through untraceable methods like wire transfers or gift cards. Insist on video calls early and often. If someone claims to love you but consistently avoids video calls, that's a major red flag. Scammers often avoid video calls because they're using stolen photos and can't appear as the person they're pretending to be. Pay attention to inconsistencies in their story. Real people have consistent life details. If someone's story changes or doesn't add up, trust your instincts. In my case, David's stories about his work, his family, and his circumstances were all internally consistent because they'd been carefully crafted, but they didn't hold up to external verification. Be wary of rapid emotional escalation. Scammers often profess love very quickly because they're trying to establish an emotional connection that will make you more willing to help them financially. Genuine relationships typically develop more gradually. Trust your support network. If friends or family members express concern about your online relationship, listen to them. They may see red flags that you're missing because you're emotionally invested. Verify identities independently. Use reverse image searches on photos. Google search their claimed profession and workplace, and ask for information that can be independently verified. If someone claims to be a civil engineer working on a specific project, that project should be findable through public records or news articles. Be cautious about secrecy. If someone asks you to keep your relationship secret or discourages you from talking to friends and family about them, that's a warning sign. Healthy relationships don't require secrecy. Question unusual communication patterns. If someone can only communicate at odd hours, refuses to give you their work contact information, or has explanations for why normal forms of communication don't work for them, be suspicious. Watch for pressure tactics. Scammers often create artificial urgency around their requests for money. They'll claim that something terrible will happen if you don't send money immediately, preventing you from having time to think clearly or consult with others. Learn about common scam scenarios. Romance scammers often use similar stories. They're traveling for work, they're in the military, they're widowed with a young child, they're working on infrastructure projects in foreign countries. Familiarizing yourself with these common scenarios can help you recognize them if they happen to you. Most importantly, remember that if you do fall victim to a romance scam, it's not your fault. These criminals are skilled manipulators who exploit basic human needs for connection and love. You're not stupid or gullible, you're human. The pain of being scammed extends far beyond the financial loss. It's a violation of trust, a betrayal of love, and an attack on your fundamental belief in human goodness. But it doesn't have to define you. Recovery is possible. Healing is possible. Love, real, genuine, honest love, is still possible. My story isn't one of just loss and victimization. It's also a story of resilience, recovery, and ultimately helping others. The $52,000 I lost was devastating, but the strength I gained and the people I've been able to help have given that loss meaning. If you're reading this and you recognize elements of your own online relationship, please take a step back. Talk to friends or family members who care about you. Do some independent research. Trust your instincts if something feels wrong. And if you're reading this because you've already been scammed, know that you're not alone. There are resources available to help you recover financially and emotionally. There are communities of survivors who understand what you're going through, and there's hope for a future where this experience becomes a source of strength rather than shame. Love is real. Connection is real. But so are the people who would exploit those beautiful human experiences for their own gain. We can protect ourselves and each other by staying informed, staying connected to our support networks, and remembering that genuine love never comes with a price tag. The man who called himself David Mitchell stole my money, but he didn't steal my capacity to love or my ability to trust. He didn't steal my future or my worth as a human being, and in the end, he inadvertently gave me a mission: to help other people avoid the pain I experienced and to show them that survival is possible. That's a gift I never expected to receive, but one I'm grateful to be able to share.